Okay. Hi, everyone. It is a little dark and wet and misty in New Jersey, but we are so happy to have these amazing authors here. For those who don't know me, I'm Stephanie Sandala. I'm programming and outreach specialist here at LiveLink New Jersey. I'm so thrilled to introduce these authors. So in no particular order, we have Samantha Chang, who is a writer of novels and short stories. Her most recent novel, The Family Chow, which I highly recommend, was published by Norton this February. She is the author of two previous novels, All is Forgotten, Nothing is Lost, and Inheritance, as well as a short story collection, Hunger. She is director of the University of Iowa Writers Workshop and lives with her husband and daughter in Iowa City, Iowa. Jenny Tinghui Zhang is a Chinese-American writer from Austin and author of Four Treasures of the Sky, which was published by Flatiron in April 2022 and was longlisted for the 2023 Andrew Carnegie Medals for Excellence in Fiction. She is a graduate of the Bona Voices and Tin House workshops and holds an MFA from the University of Wyoming. And she's working on her second novel, which I'm really looking forward to. So no pressure. And Laura Warrell is a graduate of the creative writing program at the Vermont College of Fine Arts. Her debut novel, Sweet, Soft, Funny Rhythm, was published by Pantheon in September 2022 and was also longlisted for the Andrew Carnegie Medals for Excellence in Fiction. Warrell currently writes and teaches in Los Angeles. So I guess a question for each of you is, what inspired your latest book? So I guess, Samantha, for you, that would be The Family Chow. And for Jenny and Laura, it would be what inspired your debut books. So Sam, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Hello, wet and rainy New Jersey. Yeah, my book was inspired by my reading. I read a book I really loved, The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky, and it really spoke to me because in the book there's a charismatic but tyrannical father of three sons, and there was something about his personality which I found appealing at the same time that I was horrified by it, that felt that it just spoke to me because I was the child of a tyrannical and charismatic father, and I have three sisters. The book just made sense to me in this powerful way, including its kind of fairy tale quality. Like, it just really spoke to me, and I thought, I want to be in that world, but in my world. And so it was years before I realized that it would be an exciting project to reimagine the book from the point of view of Chinese American family living in the Midwest. And I grew up in the Midwest years ago when there were very few Chinese American immigrants living there. And so I sort of set the story in that world where the characters have been living in the US for quite a while now. And, each of them has adapted, each of the children has adapted differently.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I really like how you portray each of the children and their own different stories. Like, they're some of my favorite characters, but we'll get into the more questions
Cool.
about favorite characters later. Yeah. Okay, so Laura, what was the inspiration behind your book, which is like so lovely, by the way, all the characters just really stand out.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be on this panel. So Sweet, Soft, Plenty Rhythm is about the women in a Playboy jazz musician's life. So in the book, you follow this cad as he connects and reconnects with women who are around him, as he kind of tries to run away from the responsibility that's placed on him in the first chapter when one of those women tells him she's pregnant. And so, as I said, I sort of wanted to flip the script and look at that kind of relationship from the perspective of women. And the reason it came to me, no shock to anybody, is that I was involved with a musician, not as sexy and charismatic as the one in my book. I had to do some work there. And at the same time, I was reading a book about a womanizer, and it was from his perspective. And I loved the book, but I also felt like, we've heard this story a lot of times, right? The story of Casanova, Lothario, Don Juan. This is one of the oldest, narratives that we have been following for centuries. And we rarely get to hear about what that relationship is like for the women involved. And very often those women are presented as types, right? As male fantasy, whose sole existence is to either further his journey or kind of be a projection of his fantasies. And so I wanted to write about those women and humanize them and give them dimension and give them stories outside of that relationship that they're having with him, as well as looking at that relationship through their eyes. Because I think very often when we talk about men in relationships, their behaviors, their needs, their impulses, their misbehavior is often considered natural and normal and something that women have to accommodate, women who are involved with men. And so I wanted to, as I said, sort of extract those women from that narrative and give them full stories and look at that kind of relationship from a perspective that we don't hear as much or see as much. So it was both, what a lot of us writers do, like processing what we're doing in our own lives, as well as, telling a story, hopefully, that feels fresh. So that's where that came from.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like how you tell it from women's perspective, especially his daughter, who is my favorite character. So I should have mentioned that up front, but it's just so fascinating to see how this affects her. You don't really think about that when you're, thinking about these men's stories of how does it affect their family, their daughters, their partners. So it is really great that you did bring that part out into the story.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. And Jenny, I know a little bit of the story behind your book, but do you want to share it with everyone else as well?
Yes, of course. Hi, everyone. Hello, New Jersey. So happy to be here. So Four Treasures of the Sky, the inspiration behind the book actually came from my father, who back in 2014, he was driving around Idaho for work, and he drove past this town called Pierce, Idaho. And there was this historical marker on the side of the road that said something about a Chinese hanging tree. And my dad got out of the car and read this historical marker. And it basically talked about an event in 1885 where 5 Chinese men were hanged by local white vigilantes for the alleged murder of the local store owner. So my dad, not really knowing why Chinese people were in Idaho during the 19th century, brought that story back to me and asked if I could kind of figure out what happened and write a story about it. And of course, I didn't think anything of it because I was 23, 24 at the time, just going about my life. And then in the last semester of my MFA program at Wyoming, I was in a novel writing workshop, and this was the only idea that I was interested by and that I felt was urgent and something that I wanted to pursue. And so I started researching, like the circumstances around this event, and found that one, there wasn't a lot of information around this event outside of this historical marker, but two, there were a lot of these similar instances of anti-Chinese violence throughout the West and Pacific Northwest in the late 19th century, mid 19th century. And so that's when I started feeling like, oh, this is more than just a curiosity that my dad had. It's also history that's kind of in danger of being erased, because so many of these instances are only on these historical markers on the side of the road. And this particular historical marker that my dad found had already been stolen twice and desecrated and put back. And so for me, it became, okay, this history of anti-Chinese violence in the United States is here, but outside of historians and academics, who knows about the Chinese Exclusion Act? Who knows about all of the laws and legislation and lynchings that happened? Certainly not my friends, certainly not people in my daily life. So that's kind of where all of this comes from. The book is about anti-Chinese violence. It's about these 5 men, but it's told from the perspective of a young Chinese girl named Dai Yu, who is our main character, who we see journey kind of from China through the Western United States.
Great, thank you. And I know that's like just so incredibly moving, and also like kind of difficult to write about that. So thank you for doing that like research as well. So So my next question for all of you is, you all have like just such moving characters from start to finish. So which was hardest to write about and why? So Sam, do you want to go first? And I feel like you have so many good characters in your book. Like all the brothers touched me for different reasons. So I don't know if I kind of struggle to have a favorite. Like James sometimes, Ming sometimes even. Like I go back and forth a lot, which I think is great because I don't have a clear favorite in your book. And I like that I'm challenged in that way too.
Thanks. I really enjoyed writing this book, and the characters kind of stepped out of my imagination into the book. I had to do almost no work with the three brothers. They made total sense to me because I'm from a family of many siblings of the same sex, and each of us reacted differently to my parents' lives, to the arc of their American life, you know. And the three brothers in my book have the same. Dago is their big hope. The mother and father have great hopes for him and assume he's going to be a brilliant genius and even bigger than other people, like physically larger. And he does turn out to be quite physically large, but he's, not the success that they had wanted. And his younger brother has a middle child complex, which I found very easy to do because I am a middle child. And then the youngest of all is very sweet and was brought up in such an Americanized environment by his older brothers that he doesn't even really speak Chinese. So they were not hard for me. I think the hardest character was the long-suffering girlfriend, Catherine. She, the real question I had was, the story requires Catherine to be long-suffering, but I just couldn't understand why she would continue to date Dago until I realized that she had always been possibly a child who was born in China and adopted by a white American family. But it was the point when I was sort of researching and trying to figure out how to describe that I realized that she was, in some ways, by dating Dago's family, searching for her Chinese family, even though her American family was quite positive. But that she ran into their mother, the boy's mother, who had always wanted a daughter and never had one. So they get such a close relationship between the two of them that, of course, she wants to stay in the relationship with the oldest son because she's actually in love with his mother and the mother's in love with her and they love each other. And it was at that point that the character became really interesting to me, to the point where I ended up writing some passages in Catherine's point of view.
Great. That's so fascinating because she's such an interesting character too. So
yeah, there's a lot about what she eats. She was born in the United States, and so all of the food that she ate growing up is described, and it's all of the Midwestern food that I remember staring at when I was a child and not eating.
So yeah, I kind of like how the setting is its own character in your book too. So it is really, really
cool.
nice too.
The restaurant. Yeah, it's all about
the
food.
restaurant is like its own character essentially.
Cool.
Yes. So Laura, what about you? Which one was the most difficult to write? And I do have so many good characters. Like Coco is my favorite, really, because she just resonates. But like all the women in his life, like Odessa, like they're just so haunting throughout. So you keep thinking about them.
Thank you. So yeah, there are about 10 women in the book who show up. 8 of them have their own chapters. Several of them recur, and then a couple of women show up in the few chapters that are told from the main character's perspective. His name is Circus. And strangely enough, he was the easiest character to write, the male character. He's nothing like me, but for some reason I got him. Maybe that speaks to my romantic history, that, understanding somebody who is prioritizing his career, who is prioritizing his craft, who is holding it as this very precious jewel that nothing else in the world can touch. I get that. And so he was pretty easy to write. And the little tools that I have to get into my characters, for whatever reason, really worked with him. So I could hear him. I knew how he walked. I knew what he ate for breakfast. I knew that he slapped his lips when he chewed. The women were, fairly easy to access, like I said, once I used my tools. But again, I maybe need to do a little work and figure this out. The hardest character to write was Maggie. Maggie is the woman who, in the first chapter, tells him she's pregnant. And she is a drummer. And unlike Circus, she is pretty successful. She tours the world with sort of superstar musicians. And she's somebody who is, to my mind, really together, really confident, isn't conflicted about most aspects of her life. And in fact, when she finds out that she's pregnant in that first chapter, it's not this hugely conflicted situation. It's something that she decides, all right, what am I going to do about this? How does this fit into my life? And so the challenge was both not really knowing how to access somebody who really had their act together, right? It's kind of I don't know what that says, but it was challenging to find a way into a character who really wasn't deeply conflicted. But that also sort of comes into fiction, right? Because writing about somebody who doesn't have a lot of internal conflict, what do you do with that kind of character? How do you create a story that's going to be interesting for people to read? So I kept trying to find her, and it wasn't until I realized she was a drummer that she came alive. I don't even remember what she was before that. But once I realized she was a drummer, and again, I don't even really remember how it came to me, it was set. And I think part of it was, from my perspective, and I'm not a musician, definitely not a drummer, drummers, and particularly female drummers, to me, seem to have a sense of freedom and, just free-spiritedness that I don't see in a lot of people. The idea that a woman is going to sit behind a set of drums and just pound them and make noise and feel alive doing it really helped me find her. And so she was very hard to write, and she took the longest. I kept rewriting chapters and just couldn't find her. But like I said, once I realized, okay, this is what she does, and this is what it means about her, she really came to life.
Okay, thank you. And Sue was such a great character from start to finish. I never knew where her journey would take her. And I really like that about her character too.
Thanks.
So, yeah. And Jenny, what about you? I know Dayu is my favorite character, but each character she meets along the way is just so fascinating. From a calligraphy teacher to people she meets in a brothel who are just like really genuine and kind-hearted. So which was the hardest for you to write and why?
Yeah, I think the hardest for me is this character named Nelson, and his name's Nelson Wong. Dai meets him about halfway through the novel when she makes her way over to Idaho. And oh my gosh, I just realized there's light like on top of my mouth. Sorry, everyone. So she meets him when she gets to Idaho, and I actually started writing this novel from Nelson's perspective because I had envisioned, I would follow each of these 5 men who are hanged and follow their journeys and work my way backwards from them. And Nelson was supposed to be one of those 5 men. But it just, I wrote like maybe 70, 100 pages of his story, and the writing was not great. I didn't enjoy it. The voice was off. It just felt like it was trying so hard for me when I was doing it. And then I shifted over to Dayu's voice, and that was kind of when the novel came alive. But even as I was writing him as this side character who eventually becomes a love interest for the main character, I found that I didn't know how to make him be anything more than this potential love interest. And it was really difficult for me to give him any sort of life beyond simply being this pretty and tall violinist man. And I even remember when I gave the draft to my friend to read, she got back to me and she said, I really hate Nelson. He's so judgmental. I don't understand why she likes him. He's just so he's so rude to her about like the things she believes. And I had never planned on writing him that way. So that really forced me to go back and spend some time with him and just figure out what makes someone attractive to someone else. And in my main character's particular case, it's that he ends up making her feel a sense of safety after a long journey of being wronged by particularly men. And so that was when the character kind of clicked for me, but it was For me, it felt like a long process of just figuring out what makes someone attractive to someone else.
Yeah, that's so fascinating to me because I didn't really like Nelson at first, but then he really grew on me towards the end. So at first I was like, I don't think I like this character, but maybe I shouldn't like him. But then I really did warm up to him. So yeah, that's such important context too.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, but that kind of leads me to my next question, which is like, if you could write another book about a supporting character, who would it be? So Jenny, for you, would that be Nelson, since you had already started writing his story in general?
I don't think it would be. I think I'm good with where Nelson is. I think I would actually write about Swallow, who is one of the young women in the brothel that Dayu meets in San Francisco in Chinatown. She kind of becomes a sort of friend to Dayu, but she also has her own, I guess, ethics around, where her life is going and what her role on this earth is. And sometimes it directly clashes with what Dayu thinks her ethics are. So I would love to explore more of Swallow's life and journey.
Their connection with the brothel was just so like intimate, and it was just like, I just wanted to keep exploring more of that. But then I knew her journey was leading her elsewhere, but it was a great portrayal of friendship and companionship.
Yeah.
Okay, Laura, what about you? If you could write another novel from any other character besides Circus, I guess, like who would it be and why?
So it's this may not be a hypothetical. I'm starting to sort of think this might be in my future. So when I was originally sort of pitching the book and talking to editors, there were two teams, Team Maggie and Team Coco. Coco is Circus's 14-year-old daughter. But once the book came out, across the board, Coco, people love Coco. And a couple of people were like, oh, I'd like to see, where do you think she is now? Because the book ends when she's about 18 years old. She's going off to college. And that's kind of a spoiler, but oh well. I know where she is. And I think that of all of the characters, sort of like what Jenny said, where they end up in the book, I think is the end of that journey, right? We have Circus finding out that Maggie's pregnant and how that's impacting his life and, the repercussions for the people around him. And then we sort of wrap that up. But Coco has a future. Well, they all have a future, but Coco she's at the beginning of her life. She's gone through this journey over the course of the book and really transformed, I think. And I think it would be interesting to see who she is as an adult woman, particularly because her journey in the book is really about, who are you going to be in the world? How are you going to relate to women? I think it's similar to what Samantha was saying about her book, this idea that you've got this father who is this shadow, and you've got to step out of that shadow to figure out who you are. And I think in particular for Coco, she's a girl, right? And she's at that stage in the book where she's feeling hormones and feelings and impulses and confusion about what to do about all of that. And she's got this father who is not a really great example of men in the world. And so I think it would be interesting to sort of see who she becomes in relation to men, but also just kind of in general. One of the things I've often said is, is she going to become a woman who ends up in a book like this in, 10 years? Or is she gonna, having been through this journey of the book, make different choices? So I think not only would I write a book about Coco, but it might happen. I mean, way in the future, but it's back there cooking.
Great. That's so good to know, because I'm fully team Coco, just like her entire story. And like, I'm just thinking at the end, like, where would she be now? Like, she has so much potential in the future. And like, what is her life like now that she's not in her father's shadow? So I would love to see a novel from her perspective. So yeah. And Sam, what about you? If you could write a novel from any supporting characters, who would it be? Would it be Catherine, maybe?
That's so interesting, because I ended up really liking writing in her perspective, and maybe it would be Catherine. I also like this other minor character who I actually did write from her point of view. Her name is Lin Chen, and she is the daughter of these people, this lovely couple who really want her to go into data analytics. And she switches her major in the course of the novel to journalism. And this appalls her parents. They think she's going to starve in a garret. They did not, make a lot of sacrifices for her to be wasting her time. But, ultimately, part of the novel is written from Lynn's point of view when she covers a trial as a journalism assignment. And we get to read that, what she learns and, the things, to get the information about the trial from reading Lynn's blog that she gets to see on because she fails to follow the rules of blogging, which in this particular assignment asked her to use bullet points, not to have paragraphs more than 3 lines long, etc. And I felt like Lynn is on her way to getting into trouble with everybody. Not only does she disobey her parents and decide to continue on in her journalism major, but I have a feeling she's going to end up observing and writing things about her community and about, the world that are going to get her in trouble. She's on her own journey, and I sort of imagine that she would be the storyteller for this entire community in some way at some point, and that she might not be a journalist. She may end up being a novelist.
Oh, that'd be lovely. I would love to read that too, but no pressure, obviously.
No, Catherine would be great because I think
Yeah.
she's a serious person.
Yeah.
And Dostoevsky had originally planned for there to be a sequel to the Brothers Karamazov, and then he died and didn't get a chance to write it. So there's a lot of hanging threads at the end of that book, a lot of stuff to do. I don't think I want to write one now, but sometimes I think about it. People have asked.
Yeah. So you definitely have to keep us posted too.
Yeah.
So, and I know how you each write a lot about family. So I wanted to ask, how's your family shaped you and what does it mean to you? Sam, I know you're lots of girls in your house when you were growing up, yeah, you're just a lot of,
Yeah. I mean,
sometimes chaos,
it
dysfunction.
was total chaos. I just cannot believe now that given the very big personalities that have come out of our house, I can't believe we all fit into the same space. But there were 3 bedrooms and at various times 7 of us living in that house, including my grandmother. And it was a small house, a small ranch style house in Appleton, Wisconsin. And my sisters, I was the 3rd out of 4 sisters. And I think 2 things happened. One, because I was the 3rd out of 4, my parents forgot to pay attention to me, and they let me get away with sort of developing quite a reading habit and a lot of imagination and sort of a daydreaming quality that they probably wouldn't have allowed to have happened if they had had their way. They wanted us to be on top of it. They wanted us to go into money-making professions and, all of that. So yeah, definitely. And my 2 older sisters are such strong personalities that they're great. I don't know. All of my family members are great in terms of making me think a lot. And I don't know, just sort of letting me do what I was going to do. One of my sisters became a doctor, so my parents had that, and one of them became a lawyer. And so there was space for me.
Laura, what about you? How's your family shaped you and what does it mean to you?
I really love my family. I feel lucky. I know a lot of people don't necessarily feel that way. The holidays roll around. I'm not going to see them this year because I've been traveling a lot, but I'm like, yay, I get to see my family. I was raised by a single mother and did not have a relationship with my father. So there was definitely a moment as I was writing this book where I thought, oh, am I Coco? So there's a little way that I think I, end up in my work. But my family, so I'm from the Midwest. My family is sort of a middle class. They're white, the family I know, white family. And I think they were very protective of me. I grew up in the 80s, a Black kid with a single mother. My mom and I didn't have a lot of money. So I think they were very protective of me. Had a sense maybe that things weren't necessarily going to be easy. So I felt very, very loved and very supported. My mother had me when she was really young, so she was kind of a kid herself. And I think that there was this sense, especially from her, that as a parent, my job is to figure out who you are and help you become whatever that is. So as a kid, I was like, I wonder if I want to take photography classes, and somehow she managed to have me do that, and theater classes and music, and I had to play piano and sports, everything. I think in order to figure out who I was, and writing was always there, and she was always supportive. This was my 5th book. I've been chasing this goal all of my adult life. It happened when I was 50, and my mother never doubted, ever, that this was going to happen, and never voiced any kind of skepticism, never had that, maybe you should focus on other things. And that's really kept me going. And in fact, I think all of my family is like that. There aren't a lot of readers in my family. In fact, my uncle drove 3 hours to come to one of my events, which I was thrilled about. But then he had me sign the book for his wife. He's like, well, I mean, I'm not going to read it. I don't actually read, but they're really supportive. And that, I mean, has sustained me. And I think, there's so many aspects to finding success as a writer. And part of it is just continuing, even when you're hitting obstacle after obstacle. And I think because my family has been so supportive from the beginning, it's kept me going. And so I'm really grateful.
That's so lovely to hear. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Jenny, what about you? I know you were very close with your dad, especially. But yeah, what does family mean to you, and how has it shaped you?
Yeah, so my parents, so I was born in China. We're from China. My parents immigrated over to the States in the early 90s. My mom came first, and then my dad, and then I came over when I was 5. But we've always just been, I don't have any siblings, I'm an only child. It's just always kind of been my dad, my mom, and I in the United States. And everyone else is back in China, my grandparents, my aunts. I have a cousin and an aunt who live in Australia. But other than that, it's like China, and then we're the outpost in America. So it's always felt like it was just the 3 of us against the world, or America, I suppose. And in many ways, I think there was a loneliness that came from that, knowing that we were in many ways severed from like the larger family. But I think it also had this immense like security, a feeling of security for me, knowing that it was just the 3 of us and we were like just together as a unit. I think in my book that comes through as well, where the main character, she's very close to her parents, and when they go missing, it becomes her directive to kind of figure out how to find them again and go back to China and find them again. And I definitely drew from, emotional truth for that, because I think the way my family has shaped me is just that I see family as this feeling of like comfort and home and safety and closeness. And similar to Laura's experience, my family has always been extremely supportive of my writing. My mom actually was an English major at Ole Miss. She was getting her graduate degree in English. She graduated and then realized she couldn't find a job with an English major, so went back and got a comp sci degree. And now she teaches computer science. And I feel like me pursuing writing has been kind of a way for that dream to continue within our family, the kind of storytelling capability that my mom has always had, but never got to actualize. I feel like we're kind of getting to do that now, and that's really special to me.
Yeah, well, that's so nice to hear too. So I was going to ask too, I kind of felt losing my next question, Jenny, like, how did your family respond to your book? I know your dad wanted you to write it. So how did he respond to it? And like, was he just overwhelmed by like gratitude for writing it? Like, love to hear his thoughts too, as well.
Yeah, he was very happy. He finally listened to the book on audio when it came out. And when he finished, he said, it was good, but I still have some questions, which is hilarious to me. But it's just made them so happy. And they keep saying like, you have given us the greatest happiness that like we could ask for in this life. And I just don't even know what to do with that, because as a child, it's like, no, you have given me my life, so I cannot say anything in response to that. But yeah, it's made them so happy, and I love that for them.
I do too. That's so heartwarming too. Yeah. And Laura, how did your family respond to your book? I know you said they were incredibly supportive too, but
Yeah.
you know, did some of them read it at least?
I think some of them read it.
Okay.
I think my mom read it for sure. And it's funny because there's a character in the book named Pia who is Circus's ex-wife, and she is Coco's mother, and she's still carrying a torch for Circus. And she is kind of the least liked character in the book, and my mom hates her. And it's funny because years ago, like decades ago, I wrote a short story, wasn't published, but it was about a mother. It was about a couple, it was actually just about a family, and she didn't like the mother there either. And was like, you know, if I were in that situation, I would never. And I was like, Mom, it's not about you. So I think whenever I'm writing about mothers, she's really got her radar up, even though she was a wonderful mother. We have a great relationship, and any bad mother from here on out is not my mom. But the other piece, she was visiting me when I gave her the galley, and she started reading it, and I was in the bathroom, and she storms in tears because I had dedicated the book to her. It was like, this is really not the time. But she's absolutely thrilled. I think my entire family is really excited. I mean, they have pictures of me on a typewriter, you know, in high school, or even earlier than that. And I think, you know, as supportive as they've been throughout my life, I'm sure there was doubt, you know, in their minds. And also, you know, I'm from a family that people aren't artists. They aren't, you know, chasing sort of dreams that are a little off the beaten path. And so I think the fact that I did it, they, you know, published a book is really foreign. I mean, I felt like growing up in Ohio, that's where I'm from. I just felt like getting from here to publishing a book, the path is just weeds and grown up. I have no idea how to get there. And part of it was growing up in a family that just didn't have any experience with that kind of goal. And so I think that it's really exciting to them. They've posted about it on social media, and they're telling their friends, and my stepdad's doctors, you know. And so they're really excited, and it's similar to Jenny's experience. I mean, it just feels, I mean, I know a lot of writers and creative people who, you know, their families haven't been supportive. And so I just feel like I'm really glad. It's sort of what Jenny was saying. I'm glad that my mom gets to feel good about that, and the rest of my family as well.
No, I am too. And that's actually funny because Pia was not my favorite character at first either. I really struggled with her because I was like, what is she doing? Like, I can't stand her. Then I'm like, okay, maybe she's hurting. So I went back and forth a lot with Pia. So, but I'm not the only one who, you know, felt that way about her.
I totally accept that. I knew that I was like sacrificing her. But yeah, it's you're not alone.
Yeah, and I kind of like that I don't like root for her, because then that kind of makes me think of like, why do I have this visceral reaction? Because then like I kind of like that I'm thinking about that too. So yeah. And Sam, like, how did your family respond to any of your novels? Or, you know, oh no.
I think they've been pretty good about it. They've mostly been tactfully silent about it. The family chow is a special case for me, because when I was writing the book, both of my parents passed. So it took me a long time to write the book, and my mom died in 2014, my dad in 2020. So I never got to know what they would have thought about it. I think my dad would have been perfectly happy with the character of Leo Chow, who's kind of a jerk, except he would have been sort of disapproving of the fact that Leo swears, because and also that Leo didn't behave like an educated person because my dad was an engineer. But a lot of I wonder what he would have said, because a lot of Leo's attitudes and thoughts actually kind of fused into me from growing up with my dad, who was born in 1922. So he's many revolutions ago. Like he's been through, between the US and China, like several revolutions, including the Cultural Revolution, but the Communist Revolution. And also, he was, pretty old school. I don't know what he would have thought of this. It's a very strange thing with me as I've gone on as a writer, that the sort of experiences I have become further and further removed from, like, publishing my first book and the response of my family of origin to that book. But when that book came out, I think they were quite proud of me. And I think they continued to be quite proud of me as I continued to write books. But I stopped feeling worried about what their response would be. And I think one of the reasons I was able to write this book with, the complicated dad figure or whatever, was that I was pretty sure that my dad would accept whatever it was that I came up with. It's nice to think that my writing, has occurred over a couple of decades now, and that my parents sort of came to live with the fact that I was doing an impractical and risky thing. And they became, proud of me ultimately.
Yeah, and that's the most important thing too. So
yeah.
So that kind of leads to one of my next questions is, how did you know when your book was finished? So I know, Sam, do you want to go first? Because I know that ending was just so good. So, like, how did you know when to stop?
Oh, I'm so glad you like the ending.
I did. Would other people not like it?
Well, there are people who think that it doesn't answer enough questions.
But I liked it about it.
Yeah, I did too. I mean, I wanted to write. Okay, so when I wrote this book, everything was so alive to me. The characters were alive. The situation was alive. The place felt alive. The world of the book felt big and exciting and interesting to me in such a way that I felt that the book should not contain it. It's more like the book should show it, and that it would sort of go beyond the scope of the book, if that makes any sense. And so one of the reasons that the book ends the way it does, with a lot of things still unclear, like you don't know if Ming and Catherine are going to get together or not. You don't know what's going to happen. I don't mean to give away spoilers, but there's a certain amount of open-endedness about the book. And it made me feel sort of excited to know that things were going to continue after the book was over. So that's one way that the ending, that I was thinking about the ending. I think that part of the question is really, for me, it's always like, how do I know when I'm finished? You work on it for so long. And this book, it's been 12 years since I published a book. So a lot of things happened to me. I was very busy. And it took a long time to write the book. How did I know when it was finished at all? It had something to do with just a general awareness that these characters had told me what they were going to tell me for this particular story, and that it felt right. It just felt like an ending. It felt like the book was over, and that I should sort of move on. Don't know how to describe it another way. I started showing it to people to read at a certain point, and at a certain point it became clear to me that I was tweaking things more than I was making big changes.
No, I think that's a great answer, Sam. So I appreciate that. Yeah, Laura, how did you know when yours was finished? I know, Coco's story is really almost just beginning at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Circus is like almost like kind of trying to reinvent himself. So there's so much that you're left thinking about.
While I'm thinking about it, I also wanted to say I also liked the end of The Family Chow too. I liked who it ended with. That's what I'll say without giving anything away.
Thanks for reading it.
Sure. So I guess I feel like there are two ways to answer. The first piece is where it ended, and without giving too much away, and sort of came at in a later draft. It had ended in a different place. And after sending it to a few people, readers, before I went on the agent search that ended up with my actual agent, people felt like, well, I want to hear from these characters. I want to know what happens to these characters, or how, after these final decisions or moments happen in this draft, I want to know what happens afterward. And so then I wrote, I think, a couple more chapters to do that. So that was just sort of structurally on the craft level. But then there's that larger question of like, how do you know when something is done? And I feel like there's no answer that doesn't sound like we're trying to mythologize the process. Like, oh, it's just, but really it's a feeling. And it's kind of like, I don't know how else to describe it, but just feeling like, okay, there's nothing else for me to say. That even when I write a paragraph and like I struggle over a sentence and whether it sounds right, it just suddenly like, that's it. Now maybe that's a way to think of it, like the music, right? The harmony that is slightly off. Now it sounds right. And it feels similar with when the book is finished. Like it just feels like everything is in place. All of the chords it's hitting the right notes. I'm sorry to keep throwing musical analogies, but that's how it feels. And I think when I teach writing, I often talk about or tell students, trust your instincts, right? Trust your feelings. When it's not working, but you also know when it is. And so let that voice be your guide, right? When you feel like, okay, structurally, it's doing everything I want to do. All the parts are there. But now I'm also feeling like I don't have to touch it anymore. It's where it needs to be.
Oh yeah, I really, really like that. Yeah. But Jenny, what about you? I know yours has just like this gut-wrenching conclusion. I just love the aspect of magical realism in your book too. But I just thought were just so moving. So how did you, I know it kind of is like an almost a natural conclusion, but do you plan on ending it specifically at, I don't know, give anything away if you haven't read it, like at that moment?
I did. I always knew where it was going to end, even before I wrote the book. So in many ways, I feel lucky in that I didn't have to do a lot of planning. I feel like I just worked my way backwards from what I always knew the ending would be. So plot-wise, figuring out where I was finished was easy in that sense. But I think in that like emotional realm of like, how do I know my book is finished? I would agree with Laura and Sam. It's a feeling, and I don't know how else you can describe it. For me, I would often just worry about the book. I would like go to bed just being like, oh my gosh, what about this part? What about this part? What about this character? And when I knew I was kind of finished with the book was when I just felt proud of the book. Like I would go through and read pages and think, yeah, there's truly nothing else that I would want to change anymore. I'm happy with it, and I'm happy to read this just as a reader at this point. So the feeling was just contentment with what the book was, and that was when I knew I could step away from it.
Yeah, I like that. I appreciate that all of you have the same answer in that aspect. So just knowing, you just know when it's done. I think my last question for each of you is, what is the significance of the title of your book? Jenny, do you want to go first? Such a great title. So how did you choose it, or did you choose it, or what's the thought process behind it?
So the book originally had a different title, which is also a spoiler, but I'll just say the original title was very hardcore compared to this title. But this title was actually an accident. I was in an editorial meeting with my US and UK editor, and we were talking about, okay, we need a new title for the book. And I threw out the suggestion, Four Treasures of the Sky. What I meant to say was Four Treasures of the Study, which it's a principle and a phrase around Chinese calligraphy, which describes the four tools of calligraphy practice, the four treasures of the study. And I misspoke and I said sky instead of study. and no one caught it. I didn't even think about it. We were all like, oh my gosh, this is the title. It makes complete sense. And then it wasn't until afterwards that I realized this was not what I meant to say at all. But I think in many ways, because my book deals with questions of fate, not to sound woo-woo, but there was a fated element to that accident, I think. In the end, I think if you read the book and you're paying attention, there are a lot of invocations and instances of the sky and the way that the main character and the characters relate to the sky, both physically and like spiritually. So I think it kind of was the title that was meant to be, but it was an accident. Yeah.
That's so funny. I thought it was meant to be too, because there are instances of like she's trying to return home to China. So she's thinking of like, how do I get there? So I just thought it was intentional. So that is like just such like a lovely story too. So Laura, what about you? What about your title, which is also a lovely title as well?
Thank you. So I'm really bad at titles. I really struggle to come up with titles. And so one of the things that I do when I can't come up with the title is I look for quotes or song lyrics or whatever. And if I can, and if it's appropriate, maybe use them, or at the very least, hope that they trigger some ideas. And I found a quote from Jelly Roll Morton, a jazz musician, who said that jazz should be played sweet, soft, plenty rhythm. And, you know, it's appropriate. Circus is a jazz musician. And then those four words together, I mean, it just sounds really nice. And I feel like it matches the spirit, the language, the hopeful sensuality of the book. And I think that, you know, jazz should be played sweet, soft, plenty rhythm, but I think there's also love and romance and connection should be played the same way. And so that's where it came from. And I felt very fortunate because, like I said, I had titles like The Women. I mean, that's how bad I am at titles. And so fortunately, everybody liked it. There was talk at one point about shortening it to like sweet, soft or plenty rhythm. And fortunately, that didn't last long. People liked the title, which I'm very glad about. And yeah, I think it's a nice introduction. You know, this is what you're going to get. If this title is ringing something, yeah, maybe go ahead and open the book.
Yeah, no, I like that too. Yeah, it is a really catchy title too. And the cover is also really beautiful.
Yeah, I was so happy when I saw that. The first draft, I was like, we're done. This is great. Yeah, it was beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and Sam, like, how did you think of the title for The Family Child, which is just so simple and like, just like, you know, memorable too?
It's really basic. I'm terrible with titles.
Oh,
I mean, all that happened was the thing I wanted to change for the publication of the book was my name. I wanted to be L.S. Chang instead of Lan Samantha Chang. And so I wasn't really thinking about the title, and I sent the manuscript to my agent. It was Untitled Novel by L.S. Chang. And they were like, okay, Sam, that's you won. You could be L.S. Chang. But then, you know, I talked to one of my students. She's like, no, you can't do that. You're Lan Samantha Chang. I don't know why I believed her, but so compared to that drama, the title was super easy in that I always loved the way that it sounds to put the name of the family after the word family. So like instead of the Chow family, the family Chow. And because the Brothers Karamazov was the Brothers Karamazov, which is in translation, I thought, I'm going to call this the Family Chow. And so they said, when we send this out, what should we say is the title? We need a title. And I said, well, I had this working title that was Doghouse, because there are a lot of dogs in the book. And it was just helpful for me to think of it as the Doghouse. But I said, okay, I was thinking the Family Chow. I said I was thinking Doghouse, but that was my working title. And so the family has the Family Chow, and they were fine with it. The only problem with it is that it makes people think it's sort of like a family book, and it is a family book. It's about sort of the heat at the center of a very complicated and traumatized and, you know, dramatic family, but it's about a bunch of other things also. So it did, that is one thing that happened to it. It became a family book, but overall, happy with the title.
Yeah, and thank you. And I think we're almost wrapping up. So I want to thank you all again for being here. So thank you, Jenny, Samantha, and Laura. And I highly recommend everyone picking up their books for the library. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun and nice to meet everybody.
Nice to meet you.